husband's girlfriend, moved into our house while I was at my mom's funeral. My mother chose my abusive ex over me in court, lost all grandparent rights. She's an unfit mother who puts men before her children's safety. Those were the words my own mother spoke into the courtroom microphone, testifying for my abusive ex-husband in our custody battle. My name is Megan Stewart, I'm 34 years old, and I work as a forensic accountant in Portland, Oregon. As I sat there on March 15, 2019 at exactly 2:17 p.m., watching the woman who raised me lie under oath to help the man who had put me in the hospital twice, something crystallized inside me. I wasn't angry anymore. I was focused. The irony wasn't lost on me that my profession involved uncovering lies and hidden truths through meticulous documentation. What my mother and ex-husband didn't know was that I had spent the last 8 months building the most comprehensive case file of my career, and they were about to become my most satisfying subjects. But let me back up to where this nightmare began, because the betrayal ran deeper than even I initially understood. I met David Mitchell when I was 22, fresh out of my master's program at University of Oregon. He was charming, successful in real estate, and seemed to worship the ground I walked on. My mother, Patricia Stewart, absolutely adored him from day one. Finally, she'd say, a man who can take care of my daughter properly. The red flags started small. David would suggest I wear different clothes, claiming he just wanted me to look my best. He'd show up unannounced at my office, calling it romantic surprises. When I got promoted to senior forensic accountant at Morrison & Associates, he seemed less thrilled than I expected. "Don't you think you're getting a bit too ambitious?" he asked over dinner. "I make enough for both of us." My mother sided with him. "Megan, honey, maybe it's time to focus on starting a family instead of climbing corporate ladders." I should have seen it then, but love makes you blind to patterns you'd spot immediately in a financial audit. We married in 2010, and I had our daughter Emma in 2012, followed by our son Lucas in 2014. David's control escalated gradually. He insisted on managing our finances since real estate was unpredictable, and he needed to optimize our cash flow. As a forensic accountant, I found this insulting, but I was exhausted with 2 small children and a demanding career. The first time he hit me was on a Tuesday evening in November 2016. Emma, then 4, had spilled juice on his laptop during a video call with clients. I stepped between them when he started yelling at her, and his open palm caught me across the face with a crack that echoed through our kitchen. "Look what you made me do," he said, his voice eerily calm. "If you hadn't interfered, none of this would have happened." I stood there, tasting blood, with Emma crying behind me and Lucas screaming from his high chair. In that moment, the forensic accountant in me activated. I started documenting everything. That night after David went to bed, I created an encrypted folder on my personal laptop. Photos of the bruise, a detailed written account with timestamps. I researched Oregon's domestic violence laws and recording consent requirements. I learned I could legally record conversations in my own home without David's knowledge. The second incident happened 3 months later. David had been drinking after losing a major real estate deal, and I made the mistake of suggesting he slow down on the alcohol. He grabbed my wrist so hard it left finger-shaped bruises that lasted 2 weeks. This time, I documented everything, before the swelling even started. But when I tried to confide in my mother, she dismissed my concerns. "Every marriage has rough patches, Megan. David worked so hard for you and those children. Maybe try being more supportive instead of always criticizing him." Her words stung, but I filed them away too. Evidence comes in many forms. The pattern continued for months. David's violence was always calculated, controlled, and followed by elaborate apologies and expensive gifts. He never left marks that would show in my professional attire. He never struck me in front of the children, though they certainly heard the aftermath. My mother's response became increasingly frustrating. She'd invite David to family dinners without telling me, claiming she was helping us work through our problems. She'd volunteer to babysit so David and I could have date nights to reconnect. When I tried to explain that I was afraid of my husband, she'd sigh and say, "You've always been dramatic, Megan. David loves you so much it probably just comes out wrong sometimes." In September 2017, David broke 2 of my ribs during an argument about Emma's preschool tuition. He claimed the school was too expensive, despite the $89,430 he'd spent on his new Porsche 3 months earlier. When I pointed out this discrepancy, he shoved me down our hardwood stairs. The emergency room visit was explained as a clumsy fall while carrying laundry. The attending physician, Dr. Rebecca Chen, looked skeptical, but couldn't prove otherwise. I made sure to get copies of all medical records for my growing file. That file had become extensive. 17 documented incidents of physical violence, 43 instances of financial control, 67 examples of isolation tactics, and 112 recordings of verbal and emotional abuse. I had photographs, medical records, financial statements, and witness testimony from neighbors who'd heard David's shouting matches. But I also had evidence of something else: my mother's willful blindness and active enablement of David's behavior. When I finally decided to leave David in January 2018, I did it the way I'd handle a complex fraud investigation. I quietly opened a separate bank account, transferred copies of all important documents to a secure location, and consulted with Martha Rodriguez, one of Portland's most respected family law attorneys. This is the most thorough documentation I've seen in 15 years of practice, Martha told me during our first meeting. Your forensic accounting background shows, but I need to warn you, custody battles can get ugly, especially when there's this much money involved. She was right, but even Martha couldn't have predicted how ugly it would actually become. David's initial response to the divorce filing was predictable: shock, denial, promises to change, and threats of financial ruin. What I didn't expect was my mother's reaction. "How could you do this to Emma and Lucas?" she demanded during a confrontation in my new apartment. "They need their father. You're being selfish, destroying a family over some rough patches." "Mom, he broke my ribs. He gave me a concussion. What rough patches are you talking about?" "You've always exaggerated everything for attention, Megan. David told me about your medical bills, how you've been seeing psychiatric doctors. This was news to me." "What psychiatric doctors?" "For your depression and anxiety medication." "Don't lie to me." I wasn't on any psychiatric medication, but apparently David had been laying groundwork for something much bigger than I'd realized. The custody hearing was scheduled for March 2019, giving both sides time to prepare. David hired Thomas Brennan, a lawyer known for aggressive tactics and high-asset divorces. I continued working with Martha while secretly conducting my own investigation into David's finances and my mother's involvement. What I discovered made my blood run cold. David had been systematically hiding assets for nearly 2 years, starting around the time of his first physical assault on me. He'd opened accounts in his mother's name, transferred property through shell LLCs, and purchased expensive items that could easily be resold. The total hidden assets amounted to approximately $347,892. But more disturbing was what I found in my mother's financial records, which I legally accessed through her power of attorney agreement we'd signed years earlier when she had some health scares. David had been paying her monthly payments of $1,500 for household assistance and childcare support had been flowing from one of David's hidden accounts into my mother's checking account for 18 months. The payment started exactly 2 weeks after the first time I'd tried to talk to her about David's abuse. My own mother was literally being paid to gaslight me. I sat in my car outside her house at 11:30 p.m. on a cold February night staring at the printed bank statements, feeling something inside me turn to ice. All those times she'd dismissed my concerns, sided with David, minimized his behavior, she'd been financially incentivized to do so. The next day, I installed security cameras in every room of my apartment and began recording all phone conversations with both David and my mother. Oregon's one-party consent law meant I was operating completely within legal boundaries. 2 weeks before the custody hearing, my mother called with a bombshell. "Megan, I need to tell you something important about the court case." "What about it, Mom?" "David's lawyer contacted me. They want me to testify about what kind of mother you've been." My forensic training kicked in immediately. "What did you tell them?" "Just the truth, honey. That you've always been unstable, putting your career before your children, never satisfied with anything David did for the family. They said it would help them understand the full picture. And you agreed to this?" Someone needs to speak up for those children's best interests. David loves them so much, and you're trying to take them away from him. That conversation was recorded, time-stamped, and immediately uploaded to my secure evidence folder. 3 days later, I received David's witness list through Martha. My mother was listed as a character witness, not for me, but for David. The betrayal was complete, but so was my preparation. I spent the next 72 hours preparing a counter-strategy that would make my most complex fraud investigations look simple. I contacted Dr. Chen from the emergency room and secured her testimony about the suspicious nature of my injuries. I subpoenaed David's hidden financial records through Martha. Most importantly, I prepared a comprehensive presentation that would expose not just David's abuse, but the entire conspiracy. The morning of March 15, 2019, I arrived at the courthouse with 3 bankers' boxes of evidence and a level of calm that surprised even Martha. "Are you ready for this?" she asked as we walked up the courthouse steps. "I've been ready for over 2 years. David's testimony came first. He painted a picture of a devoted father married to an increasingly erratic, career-obsessed woman who put work before family. He claimed I'd become physically aggressive during arguments and had serious mental health issues that made me an unfit custodian for Emma and Lucas. His lawyer, Brennan, was smooth and prepared. Every accusation was carefully worded to avoid outright lies while creating maximum doubt about my stability and maternal fitness. Then came my mother's testimony. She walked to the witness stand like she was attending a church service, dressed in her best navy suit and pearls. When Brennan asked her to describe my behavior as a mother, she didn't hesitate. "My daughter has always put her career first," she said clearly into the microphone. Even as a child, Megan was obsessed with being right, with proving she was smarter than everyone else. When she became a mother, that didn't change. She works long hours, travels frequently, and often seems more interested in her computer than in Emma and Lucas. "Have you observed concerning behavior in your daughter's interactions with the children?" "Yes. She's impatient with them, critical, always correcting everything they do. David is the one who plays with them, takes them to activities, makes sure they feel loved. In your opinion, what custody arrangement would be in the children's best interests?" My mother looked directly at me as she answered, "David should have primary custody. He's the stable, nurturing parent. The children would be better off with him." I watched the judge, the Honorable Susan Walsh, taking careful notes during this testimony. Her expression was neutral but attentive. When Martha began cross-examining my mother, I felt the first stirring of satisfaction I'd experienced in months. "Mrs. Stewart, you've described your daughter as career-obsessed. Are you aware that she's received 3 commendations from the Oregon State Bar for her work helping domestic violence victims recover hidden assets?" No, she never mentioned that." Are you aware that as a forensic accountant, your daughter has donated over 200 hours annually to pro bono work with women's shelters?" "No." You testified that David is the nurturing parent. Are you aware that he's never attended a parent-teacher conference for either child?" "I don't know about school things." "But you do know about your daughter's parenting, despite living 45 minutes away and visiting approximately once monthly?" My mother's composure started cracking. "I know my own daughter." "Mrs. Stewart, have you received any financial payments from David Mitchell during the past 2 years?" The question hit like a physical blow. My mother's face went completely white. What do you mean?" Martha approached the judge with a folder. "Your Honor, I'd like to introduce Exhibit 47A through 47R, bank statements showing monthly payments of $2,500 from accounts controlled by David Mitchell to Patricia Stewart, beginning in August 2017 and continuing through February 2019. The courtroom was dead silent except for the sound of papers rustling. Judge Walsh examined the documents carefully before looking up at my mother with unmistakable displeasure. "Mrs. Stewart, you are under oath. I'll ask again. Have you received financial payments from the defendant during the period in question?" My mother tried to salvage the situation. "David sometimes helped with my expenses, but that was just family support." "Family support that began exactly 2 weeks after your daughter first reported domestic violence to you, according to these phone records?" Martha was just getting started. "Your Honor, I'd also like to introduce recorded conversations between Mrs. Stewart and my client, in which Mrs. Stewart explicitly states she was contacted by defendant's counsel and agreed to testify against her own daughter's interests. The recordings played in the courtroom like a devastating soundtrack. My mother's voice, clear and unmistakable, dismissing my injuries, minimizing David's behavior, and ultimately agreeing to testify for the man who'd been paying her to gaslight, her own daughter. But the real bombshell came when Martha called me to testify. I'd practiced this moment in my mind hundreds of times, but the reality was even more satisfying than I'd imagined. I walked to the witness stand carrying a single folder, placed my hand on the Bible, and prepared to present my case. Mrs. Mitchell, you work as a forensic accountant. Can you explain what that means? I investigate financial fraud by analyzing patterns, documenting evidence, and building comprehensive cases that can withstand legal scrutiny. I've worked on over 300 cases involving hidden assets, financial manipulation, and fraud conspiracies. Did you apply these professional skills to your own marriage? Yes. Beginning in November 2016, I began documenting what I suspected was a pattern of domestic abuse and financial control. What followed was a presentation that turned the courtroom into my personal TED Talk on domestic violence documentation. I walked Judge Walsh through 17 incidents of physical abuse, each with photographic evidence, medical records, and corroborating witness testimony. I demonstrated David's financial manipulation using charts and graphs that made his hidden assets impossible to deny, but the piece de resistance was the conspiracy evidence. Your Honor, domestic abuse rarely happens in isolation. Abusers typically work to isolate their victims from support systems, and in this case, the defendant systematically corrupted my primary family relationship through financial incentives. I presented phone records showing David's calls to my mother immediately after each incident where I'd tried to seek support, financial records showing the payments beginning exactly when I started pushing back against his abuse, and recordings proving that my mother was not just passively enabling David's behavior, but actively working against my interests in exchange for payment. This wasn't just domestic violence, I concluded. This was a conspiracy to destroy my credibility, isolate me from family support, and ultimately gain control of our children through manufactured evidence of my unfitness as a mother. David's lawyer tried to object, claiming the financial evidence was circumstantial, but Judge Walsh shut him down. Counselor, I've reviewed Mrs. Mitchell's evidence. The financial payments, timing, and recorded conversations establish clear pattern. I'm particularly concerned about witness testimony that appears to have been financially motivated. When court recessed for lunch, David cornered me in the hallway outside the courtroom. You think you're so smart with your little charts and graphs, he hissed. But you're forgetting something important. Those kids love me. They'll never forgive you for this. I looked at him calmly and replied, David, Emma asked me last week why Daddy made Mommy cry all the time. Lucas has been having nightmares about loud voices since he was 2. The only thing they'll never forgive is if I failed to protect them. His face contorted with rage, but before he could respond, Martha appeared with courthouse security. Mr. Mitchell, I'd suggest you maintain appropriate distance from my client. That afternoon, Judge Walsh delivered her ruling. This court has reviewed extensive evidence regarding the welfare of Emma Mitchell, age 7, and Lucas Mitchell, age 5. The evidence shows a clear pattern of domestic violence by the defendant against the plaintiff, as well as attempts to manipulate custody proceedings through financial incentives to witnesses. She continued with methodical precision. Mr. Mitchell is awarded supervised visitation every other Saturday for 4 hours, pending completion of a certified domestic violence intervention program. Mrs. Mitchell is awarded primary physical and legal custody of both children. But Judge Walsh wasn't finished. Regarding Mrs. Patricia Stewart's petition for grandparent visitation rights, this court finds that her testimony was materially influenced by financial payments from the defendant, constituting a breach of her duty to act in the children's best interests. Furthermore, her willful dismissal of documented abuse endangers the children's welfare. The petition for grandparent rights is denied. My mother gasped audibly from the gallery. Additionally, Judge Walsh continued, Mrs. Stewart is prohibited from unsupervised contact with the minor children pending a full investigation by Child Protective Services into her role in concealing domestic violence. The gavel came down at 4:23 p.m. on March 15, 2019. I had won everything. David's reaction was immediate and predictable. He jumped up, pointing at me with shaking hands. "This is insane! She's manipulating everyone with her fake evidence and lies. Those are my children." "Mr. Mitchell," another outburst, and "You'll be held in contempt. Your supervised visitation begins only after completion of the required programs." My mother tried a different approach. As we left the courtroom, she grabbed my arm desperately. "Megan, please. You can't keep my grandchildren from me. I was just trying to help the family stay together. I never meant for any of this to happen." I stopped and looked at her directly. "Mom, you took money to help convince a judge that I was an unfit mother while my husband was breaking my bones. You recorded conversations with his lawyer about how to undermine me in court. This isn't about keeping the family together. This is about you choosing $27,000 over your daughter's safety. Please, we can work this out. I'll pay the money back. It's not about the money anymore. It's about trust. Emma and Lucas deserve grandmother who would protect them, not one who would sell them out for $1,500 a month." That was the last conversation I had with my mother for 3 years. The aftermath unfolded exactly as I'd predicted. David's real estate business collapsed within 6 months when his hidden asset schemes came to light during the financial discovery process. 3 of his major clients sued him for fraud, and the Oregon Real Estate Agency revoked his license pending criminal investigation. The $347,192 in hidden assets was recovered and split, according to Oregon's equitable distribution laws, with additional funds awarded to me for legal fees and documented economic damages from his financial abuse. My mother's situation was more complex. The CPS investigation resulted in mandatory counseling and domestic violence education before any consideration of supervised visitation. She was also required to undergo a psychological evaluation to assess her judgment regarding child safety issues. But perhaps most importantly, Emma and Lucas began healing immediately. "Mommy," Emma said one evening about 2 months after the custody hearing, "is it okay that our house doesn't have yelling anymore?" "Yes, sweetheart. Houses shouldn't have yelling. Good. Lucas was scared all the time before, but now he's not." Lucas, then 5, confirmed this in his own way by sleeping through the night consistently for the first time in over a year. The supervised visits with David lasted about 4 months before he stopped showing up regularly. The domestic violence program completion certificate never materialized. By Christmas 2019, he'd relocated to Phoenix and maintained sporadic phone contact with the children. My mother's journey back to any relationship with us took much longer. She completed the required counseling and education programs, but the psychological evaluation revealed something I hadn't expected. She'd been financially dependent on David's payments to maintain her lifestyle after early retirement. Her willingness to betray her own daughter wasn't just about loyalty to David, it was about financial survival. This revelation came during a supervised meeting in early 2022, nearly 3 years after the custody hearing. "I want you to understand," she said carefully, with the family counselor taking notes, "that I was scared. Not of David, but of losing my apartment, my independence. When he offered to help with expenses, it felt like a blessing. I didn't see it as payment for anything. But you did see my injuries, Mom. You saw the medical bills, the documentation. I convinced myself you were exaggerating because it was easier than admitting I was financially dependent on your abuser. If I acknowledged what David was doing, to you I'd have to give up the money, and I wasn't ready to face that reality." It was the first honest conversation we'd had in years. The counselor helped us work through a gradual reconciliation process. My mother began supervised visits with Emma and Lucas in September 2022, and by Christmas that year, the children were comfortable spending limited unsupervised time with her. Today, 5 years after that courthouse victory, our lives look completely different. Emma is now 12 and has become fascinated with forensic science, inspired by watching her mother solve puzzles during the custody case. Lucas, 10, doesn't remember much about the abuse period and maintains a normal, healthy relationship with conflict resolution. David sends birthday cards sporadically and calls about once every 3 months. The children are polite but not particularly interested in developing a closer relationship with him. Emma told me recently, "I don't really remember Dad living with us, but I remember feeling scared. Now I don't feel scared, so I like it better this way." My mother and I have rebuilt a relationship based on radical honesty and clear boundaries. She sees the children twice a month for supervised activities, and we're working toward overnight visits sometime next year. She's also become an advocate for domestic violence awareness, speaking at local programs about how financial dependency can compromise judgment about abuse. I hate that it took almost losing my family to understand what I'd done, she told me recently, but I'm grateful you were strong enough to save all of us. The financial recovery from David's hidden assets allowed me to start my own forensic accounting firm specializing in domestic violence cases. Stewart Forensic Services has helped recover over $2.3 million in hidden assets for abuse survivors in the past 4 years. People often ask me if I'm angry about those years of abuse, betrayal, and legal battles. The answer is more complicated than they expect. I'm angry about the time lost, the trauma inflicted on my children, and the betrayal by people who should have protected us. But I'm not consumed by that anger because I used it constructively. Every piece of evidence I collected, every recording I made, every document I preserved became part of the solution. The most satisfying part wasn't winning in court. It was watching my children rediscover what normal felt like. Emma recently brought home a boy she likes, and when I asked her about him, she said, "He's really kind, Mom. He reminds me of you. He thinks about things and doesn't yell when he's frustrated." That's when I knew we'd truly won. There's a photo on my desk from last Christmas. Emma, Lucas, my mother, and me opening presents together. My mother is laughing at something Lucas said, and Emma is leaning against my shoulder, completely relaxed and secure. It took 5 years to build this moment, but it was worth every hour of documentation, every strategic decision, and every difficult conversation. Sometimes people get the justice they deserve. Sometimes they work systematically to create it themselves. And sometimes, if you're very lucky and very thorough, those two things happen to be the same. David's last attempt at contact was 6 months ago. A rambling email about how he'd found himself in Arizona and wanted to rebuild his relationship with his children. I forwarded it to Martha, who sent a standard response referencing the existing custody order and supervised visitation requirements. My mother asked if I thought he was being sincere. "It doesn't matter," I told her. Sincerity doesn't erase history, and Emma and Lucas are thriving with the stability they have now. If David wants to be part of their lives, he'll follow the legal requirements. If he doesn't, we'll continue building the life we've created without him. That's the final lesson from this whole experience. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about destroying your enemies. It's about building something so much better than what they took from you that their absence becomes irrelevant. My children are safe, healthy, and happy. My career has become a mission that helps other survivors. My relationship with my mother, while changed forever, has become more honest and intentional than it ever was before. As for David and his co-conspirators in that attempted character assassination, they're dealing with the natural consequences of their choices while we're building something beautiful from the ashes of what they tried to destroy. And that, in the end, is the sweetest victory of all.